One note before we start. The audio recorded at the event was unusable, so I re-recorded the narration. The slides and the video are from the live talk. Good day to everyone. I want to thank NAFI for giving me an opportunity to talk, and to each of you for coming to listen. My name is Jim Carroll, and I'm a CFI from New Jersey. I teach primarily at Essex County and Lincoln Park airports, both in North Jersey under the shelf of the New York Bravo. Now, my talk is about how CFIs can use virtual reality to accelerate your students' private pilot flight training. And actually, we're going to look specifically at a type of enhanced virtual reality called mixed reality. But first, let me start with a quick story. It's a little over 2 years ago, and I'm sitting in the FBO when a friend, Ryan, joins me in one of our ready rooms. And he's got this look of amazement on his face. He just squeezed a discovery flight with two of his regular clients. It was with a 17-year-old with 0 flight time. And the amazing part, the student landed the plane on his first try. Now, a little backstory here. Ryan knew the family. He and the boy's father work for the town of Hackensack, New Jersey. Dad discovers Ryan's a CFI, and so he starts to tell him of his son's boundless enthusiasm for aviation, how he spends all of his waking hours glued to the sim. So Ryan agrees to get the son, Kevin, a discovery flight. But the schedules are going to be tight, right? It's typical Saturday morning. Day the flight rolls around. Ryan can only offer a single pass around the pattern, just a single lap. So Ryan decides to give Kevin a little latitude, let him try a landing. And to Ryan's utter amazement, Kevin did the landing himself unassisted. When all was said and done, Kevin had logged 0.3 Hobbs and his first landing as sole manipulator. Now, of course, we all wanted to know, how is this possible? How had Kevin done this? Now, I talked to Kevin myself, and through our discussions, I discovered that Kevin had used a type of learning that's become popularized under this term, deep practice. The term comes from a journalist named Dan Coyle, who in 2009 wrote The Talent Code. Now, Coyle had been synthesizing decades of research, most of it done by a psychologist named K. Anders Ericsson, who studied what separates people who become genuinely skilled at a task from those who seem to plateau. What Coyle had observed is that deep practice operates at the edge of a student's ability, this place where they're going to make mistakes and they can recognize them and then correct them. So he boiled down the requirements for deep practice into 4 individual requirements. First is this concept of focus, right? A learner needs to be ready to learn, and they've got to be fully engaged and able to practice without distractions. And this learning has to be active, it can't be passive. Second, according to the principle of intensity, the learner's got to be working really at the edge of their ability, but not so hard they're overwhelmed, right at the point where mistakes are going to happen, but where the mistakes can then be recognized and then, of course, fixed. Third, the learning needs to be high repetition. The principle of exercise says skills are built through many attempts, not a few. The more repetitions you do, the faster the skill develops. Fourth, the learning needs to make some kind of an effect, both good or bad, right? The learner's got to know when they're doing it right and when they're doing it wrong. And they got to know quickly enough so that they can course correct. Now, as CFIs, we recognize these as 4 of the 7 principles of learning. The question is, how can this help us use flight sims for private pilot training? I mean, we've had sims for years, and they're great for instrument students. But for private pilot, their use seems limited to things like checklists and flows and basic attitude instrument training. Today, I'd like to make the case that with affordable mixed reality, we can use it to teach some of what we currently teach in the cockpit. Now, I'll get to what mixed reality is in a moment, but first, let me say this is a methodology talk, not a technology talk. Technology is what makes it possible, but the methodology is what makes it work. Now, I think we can all agree the cockpit is a lousy classroom, and for most students, this is the way the cockpit looks to them on their first flight, right? Not to mention the spinning blades of distraction attached to the front of the plane, or the even faster spinning Hobbs dial draining their bank account. It's a tough place for a student to learn. Besides the cognitive load reducing their readiness, there's this negative impact on exercise and recency that's caused by the real world. I mean, weather, of course, is the ever-present disruption to training. And you get some additional impediments from things like aircraft maintenance and scheduling and availability, and then things going on in the student's personal life. And then, of course, there's this ever-present concern for money, right? And it sits on the student's shoulder like a hobgoblin. And as the hobs spins, their anxiousness goes up and their learning readiness goes down. And these disruptions add up. It's one of the reasons why the national average to earn a private is closer to 70 hours than it is to 40. It's not a question of skill or willingness. It's a simple matter of access to regular, deep practice. Now imagine if there was a tool that your students could use between lessons. What if during your post brief, you could assign them active homework, right? Go home and practice steep turns for an hour. Or I'd like you to practice 15 power off stalls before our next lesson. I mean, think about it. How many stalls does a typical student even get to practice before they go to their check ride? It's maybe 30 or 40. Now, what if you could increase that to 150? Well, with mixed reality, you can. So what is this mixed reality? Well, mixed reality is a term that means to combine computer simulations with real world objects. In flight training, it means we're wearing a headset, and embedded in the headset is a camera that can superimpose a view of the student's surroundings into the simulated cockpit. Now, while worn, the student sees the virtual world of the simulated cockpit, but they can also see their hands and the yoke and their throttle, right? In computing, we refer to this as immersion, creating a worldview or sight picture that your brain treats as the real thing. And it's this realism that creates this opportunity for learning. Now, you've all tried desktop simulators. You stare at a computer screen and see a simulated horizon directly ahead of you, but you try to fly downwind or base and you're struggling to see the runway. Now, you need to learn this complicated series of keystrokes or buttons to switch your view to judge when to make your turn, but it lacks immersion and frankly, it just feels fake. With mixed reality, the headset tracks your movement and this changes your view. So move your head left and you see the runway. Now, in this sense, your head's like the camera. Pan to the right, say to check for traffic, and your entire view pans right. When you couple this with seeing and feeling your hands, manipulating the yoke and the throttle, now your brain starts to treat this as the real thing. And that's the value. There's now a virtual cockpit available at home to supplement their in-aircraft training, active homework. Now, years ago, it would have taken expensive computers and software and guys wearing white lab jackets, right? Now, all your client needs is a headset, a flight sim, and a reasonably modern computer, and they're ready to fly. And if they already have the computer, the cost is less than 2 flight lessons, and they can reuse the setup for instrument and commercial training. So what does this mean for your syllabus? Well, as an instructor, you'll be able to rethink your homework assignments. Instead of just assigning chapters of P-hack and chair flying, you'll also have the ability to assign home sim practice. Now, modern sims have this amazingly accurate rendering of the entire United States, including your practice area. So you can easily assign them local flights. Something like, go start in the practice area, perform your clearing turns, complete your pre-maneuver checklists, and then practice turns around a point for an hour. And you can assign these practice sessions after their flight lesson to ensure they're briefed on the various ACS elements and they understand the standard to which they have to perform the maneuver. Now let's look at an example of practicing steep turns in VR. Now my practice area is the border between New York and New Jersey, bounded by the Catskills on the north, which provides some really good ground reference points that we use for steep turn practice in our practice area. So my students can spawn their sim sessions there and they get to see the same reference points peak for peak. What in-sim training is particularly good, though, is for element practice, meaning breaking a maneuver into its like individual atomic components, if you will, and then practicing each on their own. For steep turns, I like to focus on bank sight picture first. So you can suggest they start with, say, 30 degrees of bank to the left, and then just keep making 360s until they can maintain coordinated level altitude just looking out the window. Now, without the distractions of CFIT and traffic, they can just focus on learning what level looks like. And if they change altitude, tell them just to stop any climb or descent and go back to level without regard to a specific number, right? Once they've mastered 30, you can have them steepen it up to 45. And again, focused on learning what 45 degrees of bank level altitude looks like. Just have them keep making turns until they can hold level altitude. After they master turns to the left, you can repeat the sequence to the right, start at 30, progress to 45. Now, once they've got coordinated level 45 in both directions, then you can move on to rollout. You can start them on an assigned heading and then suggest they initiate a series of, say, 90-degree turns left and 90 right. The idea is just get them practicing timing that rollout using the correct rudder inputs. Now, once they've mastered that, you put all the pieces together and you fly the 45 left and 45 right with rollout. Now, this ability to break a maneuver into these constituent elements and practice each individually is what makes in-sim practice so powerful. What's really cool is if you can identify the element of a maneuver that a student's struggling with, you can give them an element practice assignment. For example, keeping with the steep turn we were just going through, sometimes students struggle with rudder on the steep turn rollout, right? They're anxious to put in enough, but practicing in sim allows them to experiment with the control pressures without this fear of over-controlling. It can't hurt the sim. So one way to help them with the rudder rollout is to suggest they practice Dutch rolls in the sim. Just keep making those turns coordinated left and right until they can see what coordination looks like, how the nose is staying right in the turn, right? It's not going adverse outside the turn. Now, after they've completed their sim training session, there's a couple things you can do to help them retain the learning for their next in-aircraft flight training. One of the first things you can do is suggest they create a written flight diary. Suggest they record the date and the time, what they practiced, how long they practiced, and then any insights or questions that they developed for you. Now, this flight diary is a really important step. It's what converts the sim session from just pure repetition into learning, right? This pause to think about this performance. This is the debrief that makes this practice meaningful for them. And you can also encourage them to read over the flight diary before their next in-aircraft lesson. And they can also bring it with them to the lesson. You can go over it with them. The next thing you could do is ask them to share a copy of the recording so you can offer feedback. Now, this is optional, but it can be useful for the student if you're willing. There are several good recorders available for the home sims. Most of the sims have one built in. I like this third-party one called Sky Dolly. It's free and it's popular with. It's compatible with Microsoft Flight Sim, so you can use it to control that. There's others for X-Plane. The thing that's important to understand, though, is that the recording is not a video, right? It is a recording of the flight parameters. And this means you can precisely reproduce the conditions for the entire training session. And the recordings, once they're created, they're small enough they can email them or text them to you. So you could use SkyDolly to replay the recording in your sim. You just import it, launch your sim, click play, and you can pause and rewind, speed up, or just skip to the section you want to review. With SkyDolly, even if they did 2 hours of training, you can review it in less than 10 minutes. When you review the recording, you can look anywhere, both inside the cockpit or outside, because the flight parameters are recorded second by second. So you can pause the action and focus on something particularly that you want to highlight for the student. Maybe they were looking to the left and you want to look inside the cockpit at one of the instruments, right? Doesn't matter where they look, you get to look where you want to. I should mention, although the student flew it in VR with a headset, you can just replay it in 2D on your desktop, and there's no need for you to have any VR hardware. Another way to review the recording is using one of the flight analysis tools, such as Cloud Ahoy from ForeFlight or Flystow. Now, Cloud Ahoy is a subscription-based service, and the professional CFI version got a fairly powerful tool to break down flights into segments, right? So you upload the entire flight, and then it scans it, and it can recognize when a section of the recording looks like a maneuver, say a steep turn, and then isolate the maneuver into its own segment. It then applies a rule-based system based on ACS to render a score from 0 to 100. Now, personally, I don't find the default scoring very accurate, but it's helpful to have this flight broken into these segments so I can focus on the elements that I care about. And you can adjust some of the elements that go into scoring so that you can make it more naturally match your teaching methodology. Cloud Ahoy's also got this great 3D tracking technology that allows you to replay the flight without needing to launch the sim. You just load the flight, and you can either watch it top-down 2D view or bring up a HUD, and you can simulate what it's going to look like or what it did look like for the cockpit when they were flying it in the sim. And this is a big time saver. Flystow is an alternative to Cloud Ahoy. its segmentation system is limited to just recognizing takeoffs and landings, but it does have a good 3D visualization to replay the flight. Now, like Cloud Ahoy, the replay can be top-down or HUD. And Flysto does have a feature to import flights from ADS-B, so you can use this to bring in flights you've flown in aircraft using just the tail number and the date. And this is great. So now you fly the maneuver in the airplane, steep turns, then you assign them homework assignments, steep turns in the sim. You can bring them up and compare them side by side to see how it went when they practiced in the sim. Did they address the issues that you raised during your pre-brief? Now, I should mention, there's no need for you to do any of this sim flight analysis. You could just evaluate their progress in the next flight lesson and then use their performance to guide your next in-sim practice assignment. Now, the Air Force has been using VR training like this for years. In 2023, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base made the following statements in their remarks to the public. Virtual reality is the epitome of chair flying in the future. Visualizing what you're going to see in the cockpit can be hard for students who've never been in the jet before. The picture may be worth 1,000 words, but the virtual reality makes it like 1,000 words are speaking to you all at once. In the end, this allows students to gain a much higher level of mastery of the skills they need to be competent at the end of the program. Personally, I don't think I could have said it any better myself. With the availability now of low-cost VR hardware, we can now realize some of these benefits for our civilian pilot learners. Now let's talk about some of the limitations of mixed reality in flight training, and I've personally identified 3. The first is the lack of G-forces while you're in the sim, right? This is obviously a real limitation. The sim is a visual and tactile representation of flight, but it's really hard to imagine a home sim is ever going to recreate the G-forces of flight. So this is particularly weakness when G-forces are useful training signal, right? Like the increased Gs from turbulence that like speed bumps remind the student to slow down below VNO or even better below maneuvering speed, right? And feeling Gs in steep turns can be a useful indication of like excess bank angle in AOA. And if your training scenario involves using steep 360s as an evasive maneuver to avoid traffic, well, they've lost a sensory guardrail. But lack of G-forces doesn't have to be entirely a bad thing, right? Removed from the distractions of force, the student can focus their attention on mastering the maneuver visually using sight picture and control pressures. And remember, the sim's not a replacement for in-aircraft training. Home sim time's not even loggable. They still need to meet the FAA's flight time requirements, and more importantly, meet the ACS performance standards for their certificate. The sim is just a tool to practice. Now, the second limitation with sim training is the risk of negative transference. That left unsupervised, the student could pick up some bad habits, and then the law of primacy means it's harder to correct. Now, your best defense against this is to assign in-sim practice in arrears. That is, after you fly the lesson in aircraft. In this way, you've briefed them on the various ACS elements before they go to practice it on their own. Now, if you're willing to offer them some coaching time, reviewing the in-sim sessions, this can act as another defense against negative transfer. I mean, you're still their teacher. You just need to develop some extra techniques to keep an eye on their home practice. It's probably worth pointing out, some students are going to explore mixed reality flight training on their own, assigned or not. So it's best to establish a process with your students beforehand with how you want them to practice. And the third limitation within sim flight training is the absence of training in decision making. With perfect weather, zero maintenance, and no scheduling, there's never a reason to scrub. Right? The sim is going to happily give you a clear, sunny day, even at midnight, with thunderstorms flashing all around you. It entirely removes the go, no-go decision making. So ADM training is still up to us, and the sim doesn't offer many solutions to this issue. But it does offer possible assistance in another way. It tempts us with the possibility of reducing training time spent on the mechanics of flight. I mean, imagine a training tool that could help a student more quickly master slow flight, stalls, steep turns. If such a tool existed, would that leave you more time for higher order scenario-based training? Would such a tool allow us to train safer pilots? I'm going to leave that up to you to decide. Mixed reality doesn't eliminate anything in the student's training. It's just a tool that gives them time to practice on their own. And this on their own part is what makes this additionally so powerful. I mean, think about commercial training. My commercial syllabus is built on demonstrating a maneuver, then turning the student loose to practice without me. And once they've mastered it, we fly together, and if they've got it, we move on. Now, that model doesn't work for private pilot. The student can only practice with us, and that means waiting on weather, on maintenance, on schedules to all line up. Mixed reality finally gives them another option. Now, one caveat I should mention before I close, you want to talk to your students about how they approach the sim, and attitude matters here. If they treat it as a game, learning won't happen, right? They have to take it seriously to get anything out of it. So you want to set that expectation up front. That student Kevin I spoke about earlier wasn't a prodigy. He was a 17-year-old. He'd never flown, but he landed on his first pass because he'd already done the deep practice at home. For years, that kind of access coupled with mixed reality was limited. But today it ships from Amazon. Now every one of your students can utilize deep practice. When we were all students, right, we knew instinctively that one day technology is going to improve and enable our methodologies to improve with it. If you take a look for yourself, you may decide technology's finally caught up. Again, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can. If you're interested in a copy of the presentation, just either give me your card or take one of mine and send me an email, and I'll be happy to share it.